What up? It's your local furry. I shouldn't say that if I want to keep any of the credibility I have so far. So hey, you made it to the first video. That's right, you heard me right. There is not just one, there's not two, there's gonna be 3 videos on the breed Savannah. Because I ramble and I can't stop talking, so I just keep going and going and go. Welcome to the first video out of 3 videos on Savannah's 101. So what are the videos gonna be about? Part 1, history and genetics. Part 2, characteristics and personality. Part 3, facts and some secrets about the breed. Basically, another part 2 because it's also just personality, but I ramble, so I couldn't shut the fuck up. So without further ado, let's move into the video. So today we're going to be talking about Savannah breed in general, and just what makes a Savannah cat a Savannah cat. You're being so cute right now. People are probably wondering, Lillian, what is a Savannah cat or what makes a Savannah cat? So a Savannah is a breed that was created by mixing a serval, which is an African wildcat, with a domestic cat. Servals originate from Africa. They're a wildcat species that live on plains, they hunt in tall grass, they have adapted long legs, they have a very great hearing. So servals were a species that were wild caught, they were brought to the US in the 1900s and then were used for breeding purposes. They tried to create the first domesticated servals. So in 1986, a hybrid cat breeder called Judy Frank decided that she wanted to research whether creating a breed between a serval and a domestic cat was possible. Judy Frank was a hybrid cat breeder for Bengals, and she decided that she wanted to figure out whether the same combination was possible for a serval cat. Bengal is basically a domestic cat breeder with a Asian leopard cat. I barely know anything on the topic. I'm not an expert on them. If anyone here does have Bengals, please leave it down below. I would like to hear more about it. It's a breed that I barely know anything about besides what they look like. So she eventually decided to breed her Siamese female cat with a male domesticated serval. The serval belonged to a lady named Susie Woods, and they actually successfully created the first Savannah in 1986 called Savannah. Wow. She was the first F1 female kitten. Now, if we're talking about the F generations, you probably heard me talk about the F6 that, for example, Gaia is, or the F7 that Nim is, F8 Nila. The F stands for a certain genetic purpose. When we're talking about F types or F generations, as I usually call them, because she's an F6 generation, it actually talks about what generation your cat is compared to what the original serval and domestic cat combination was. So if you have an F3 Savannah, that would mean that the original pair of domestic cat and serval is their great-grandparents. So for her, that would be, I think, great-grandparents? I'm really bad at math. Now, the F and F type or F generation stands for filial number. Filial basically means that something is related to or in relation of. So in this case, that would mean that when you have a certain number behind the F, it means that that is the generation removed from the original pairing of the serval and the domestic. F3 is 3 generations removed from the original serval and domestic pairing. Not the one in 1986, but just that bloodline in specific, if that wasn't clear, because technically I am using a lot of F words. No swearing on this channel. I swear all the fucking time. We're gonna talk like this from now on. Okay, now with every F generation or F type removed from the original source, you also have a certain percent of genetics that basically comes with it. So if you take the F1 generation, for example, so the first children or child that comes from the serval and the domestic cat, that would mean that 50% of that cat is probably serval. Now, when you go down the line, you go from F1 to F2 to F3 to F4, the more you go down those generations, the more you water down the serval genes in them. If, for example, the first generation is supposed to be F1 50%, F2 is gonna be around 37.5 to 25%. So every time you go down a generation, you just basically divide the number almost like in 2. If we would be able to count from the first generation all the way to, say, F6, like Gaia, she would be, I believe,
the prophecy is true.
She would be about 1.5% serval. That's all that's left of it. So if we take the number and we, for example, look at Nim, who's an F7, we just divide it back by 2. When she is 1.5% serval, Nim is going to be 0.75%. And Nila is going to be about 0.40 to 35%, depending on how you run about the number. That is basically a little bit how the F generations are supposed to work. Now, when we're talking about the F generations in general, there's also just very specific differences on how the breed looks. or how the cat will look in general. Because, for example, she looks wilder than the other two. She has more of the specific marks than a Savannah is supposed to have, and she's a bit bigger than the other two. Now, little aspects that I'm still gonna mention because... Are you done? If we witness the death of my ecosystem, I'm gonna be really pissed. See if I can move the chair with her on it. Okay, cool. We're more in center now. This is beautiful. Gaia, I love you. I love you. She is so not impressed. Oh my god. Now, since I want to keep the genetics part a bit simple, I want to keep it just easy for people to understand or to like try to figure it out, because there's a lot that goes into it. It's deeper and not as superficial as I make it out to be personally. But like for example, a little more like facts about the whole F generation parts is that, for example, males from the F1 to the F4 generations are completely sterile, meaning that they cannot reproduce. So if you actually want to create more F1, F2, F3, or F4 generations of cats, you will have to breed with an F6 cat, for example, or an F5, but I believe that most breeders actually prefer an F6. So you have to kind of like backbreed them to actually get the generation that you're looking for. And some other stuff, for example, that you can also do with the breeding is you can do backcrossing. Backcrossing means that if you take a serval and a Savannah cat, you can actually put more serval genes into that next generation. So if you, for example, have the F0 generation, you are looking snazzy over here. If you look at the F0 generation, like for me, that's the serval and the domestic cat. When they create their first F1 Savannah kitten, that one kitten can be bred back with a serval to, instead of having just normal 50% genes, create a BC1 generation, back cross one, which basically puts more serval genes. It's like I'm talking about pants. Which basically puts more of those serval genes into a new Savannah cat. So instead of having the highest possible number being 50% serval genes, you could technically go to 75 or even higher if you keep back crossing. That's like a bit more of like advanced genetics. Let's keep it at the beginner level. Even I'm not great at this. And then while we're on the topic of genetics, or just the different F generations, for the cat breed to actually be a standard Savannah cat, because every cat breed has a standard to which it has to uphold, so that if you, for example, compare her to the official standard, she will not be a standard Pacific cat. She's too dark. Her legs are just not long enough, I believe. But like stuff like that is very important. But if you want to take a generation, like an F generation that actually complies to the usual standard, it's gonna be the F4 Savannah cat. The F4 is usually a standard Savannah breed. From that point on, they're also considered domesticated, so that's when you can consider it a breed. Now, the usual standard is indeed just silver or brown spotted, but what's also important is that the spots on them are actual spots and that they're not, for example, marbled like with Nim. Hi there. I know. Lovely paw screen. Isn't Pasteline looking amazing here? This is editor Arlene right here, to just touch back on the coat patterns in the Savannah breed standard, because I have the horrible tendency to ramble and yet also brush over topics really fast for some reason. So to further touch upon coat patterns, here you can see 3 possibilities of patterns that a Savannah kitten can get. The only allowed one in this breed standard, however, is the spotted one on the left. The marbled and rosettes one are not allowed, and there's a simple reason for it. Spotted coats are the exact copy of their wild ancestor, the serval. So it kind of makes sense that Savannah should inherit these, don't they? Then what about the other possible patterns, you ask? Well, they still occur, of course, as you've seen in Nim's coat, but marbled and rosettes are actually coat patterns that people look for in the Bengal cat breed. So one of the reasons why both breeds get confused so often is because they look quite similar. So when a Savannah gets a pattern that isn't accepted into the breed standard, most specimens get sold for lower prices, and none of them are going to be used for potential further breeding, as they have a higher chance of passing on their own pattern, which is considered wrong. So are the cats any less beautiful because of it? Absolutely not. Look at my beautiful baby here. It's the exact reason why he caught my eye. Now, that was kind of all on patterns, so let's just give Pasteline her spotlight back, shall we? Anything else that also comes through is ocelli marks. Ocelli marks are basically, in this case on the Savannah breed, they're the marks on the back of the head, on the ear head part of the... Yeah, I was gonna show you, but I don't think she'll allow me to. I'm gonna put it right here. Ocelli marks are basically marks that are, in the Savannah breed, displayed on the back of the ears. They resemble the eyes of a predator so that they won't get attacked from the back. Not only Savannah breeds have this, but also different cats. Like you can look at wild cats and they will have dark spots around their ears, or even just butterflies will have markings of predator eyes on their wings, which is the same name. It's also called ocelli. In this case, it's just ocelli ear marks. The last part that we can talk about when it comes to F-types, but also just the color coding, just like the Savannah breed. It's also just that some breeders look after black noses specifically. They're sought after, but they're not standard. It's just that people prefer black noses more. Gaia, for example, she is a black nose. The other two are like slight faded gray, the like pink ones, but she has a specific black nose that it isn't just covering the nose itself, but it's also just fading upwards so that you have an actual black spot in the middle of their faces. Gaia, could you like help me out here for like 1 second and look at them? Gaia, could you do me this favor? She's so adamant on not working with me. Gaia, I'm trying to... Could you look over here? Look. You. Over here, baby. Look at this. There we go. Your beautiful black nose. Oh, I get kisses. And then she continues to bite my finger. You know? So, you made it to the end of the first video. Good job! Did you like it? Did you learn something new? Tell me about it in the comments, and I will see you next week for part 2 out of this really long 3-part series. Be sure to subscribe and like the video, and I will see you guys all next week. So, goodbye, my lovelies! I look so old and I look so tired, and that's okay, I think.